Let us listen. What would you say if we gave voice to hysteria, returned a voice to the woman? If Charcot, Freud, and the other doctors had not taken up the position of those who were supposed to know, the history of hysteria might have worked out differently. But we can't change that. In the film Hysteria, a woman's state of mind develops from an image of laughing that moves to something between laughing and crying. Between laugh and laughing, cry and crying, the pose develops, although shuttling between the noun and the progressive aspect, the continuous form, is a little rotation, repli, a development of the pose that is quickly returned, folded back into position. The movement does not progress. It goes nowhere. If Charcot, Freud, and the other doctors had not taken up the position of those who were supposed to know, the history of hysteria might have worked out differently. That the supposition of knowing displaces actual knowing forms an echo in my mind, for displacement is a consequence of the act of folding. Folding involves the displacement by secretion of parts of a whole. To fold is to conceal, but at the same time to envelop. Knowledge is not discarded, but kept within the fold, and thus secrets are made. They had no vocabulary for it. A mask forms before or instead of vocabulary. A mask may be other than visual, it may be gesture or sound, skin disease, loss of voice, or disease of breath itself. Symptom. Early in the evening, the struggle for breath began again. It lasted 19 hours. All through that night and through most of the next day, she never lost control. The final remedy, tincture of opium, sent her gently off to sleep soon after 2 o'clock, still sitting in the same position, her head resting on the table before her, as she had been all the weary hours since the evening before. She did not wake again. Winnie Seebohm, studied at Cambridge, died of asthma on 18th December 1885, aged 22. In A Suppressed Cry, Winnie's biographer, Victoria Glendinning, portrays her as a person of enormous potential, both of mind and heart, teasing out the pressures that Winnie encountered in being a young woman of high intelligence and an inquiring mind. Glendinning, writing in 1969, describes how Winnie was the victim of a system. Nowhere in Winnie's biography does Glendinning suggest that asthma is related to hysteria, but staying close to the narrative of contemporary documentation, letters, and diaries, the image she presents is also one of suppression and the voice of agency itself. An attack of asthma has the significance of a suppressed cry. It has been found that if patients can be induced to indulge in unrestrained crying, they are often eased and the asthma abated. But Winnie aimed at self-control. The nearest she ever got to crying out and putting into words the conflicts which were quite literally choking her was in a letter to her friend Lena. And yet she apologized for writing it. You were quite right about my making myself worse those last days. I did. And when I go home, I collapsed altogether. I always want everything so frantically, and I'm always just the person that can't have them. Ought I to have given up wanting things? Forgive me for growling to you, dear Lina, but I can't show it to any of them here. And if you know any solution to the problem or any numbing influence, tell me. In Invention of Hysteria, Georges Didier Huberman writes, something was constructed at the Salpêtrière, something resembling a great optical machine to decipher the invisible lineaments of a crystal, the great, territorial, experimental, magical machine of hysteria. And in order to decipher the crystal, one had to break it, be fascinated by its fall, then break it again, and invent machines permitting an even more visible regimented fall, and then break it once again, just to see. In the 19th century, women deviating from normal patterns of behavior, specified in over 75 pages of symptoms, were admitted into the sanatorium where they were observed, studied, cared for, hidden, separated, and controlled. To do this, doctors used the latest technological advance of the time, photography, as well as their public case expositions. Hysterics performing for the doctors had their elusive symptoms recorded and then played back, classified, and converted into icons of crucifixion, beatitude, ecstasy for an eager public. In 1952, the American Psychiatric Association dropped the term, replacing it with other diagnoses, post-traumatic stress and somatic disorders, for example. After this, hysteria remained confined mainly to the theoretical and the creative. At the Salpêtrière, hysterics shared the wards with epileptics, from whom they learned to internalize and project their symptoms. This mimetic character of hysteria put the public under suspicion and brought accusations of fabrication. Hysterics are considered mad insofar as they deviate from what is the acceptable norm. The mind and the body split, and the body takes a life of its own. This is not to say that the hysteric symptoms are easy to live with, that the men and women are not suffering. But what I want to raise here is whether the trouble with hysteria is within, a madness, or outside, an impossible demand. The symptom the woman in Sam Taylor Wood's short film Hysteria attempts to master is connected to the globus hystericus, a lump in the throat thwarting expression of what goes on inside the body. I can only guess this, of course, for she has no voice to tell me. The woman seems to be at the last stage of the attack after the delirium, where tears and laughter collide, about to come back to herself. Or is she? If a diagnosis of hysteria existed today, what would she be miming? She looks at us and opens her mouth to show us inside, perhaps her womb. The hysteric knows more about psychic realities, revealing them through the body and showing us something of ourselves that would otherwise remain invisible. They are, in the words of Luce Irigaray, a speculum, an instrument to dilate the lips, literally, the orifices, the walls, so that the eye can penetrate the interior of the self, tracking down what there is to be seen of female sexuality. I want us to look into the interior of hysteria. Will we end in a confusion of laughter and crying? I hope so. I'm remembering the kneeling figure of a girl I drew once, taken from an altarpiece by Grunewald. I call my drawing possession, asking whose. Later, I discover that this image of an exorcism depicts the saint healing epilepsy, a condition that, like hysteria, possesses the whole person through the body and must therefore be itself possessed, cast out. The saint's thumb locks over the jaw, pushing her head back to release the demon. Her hands fly open, distorted and disempowered as the demon convulses heavenward. The girl's eyes twist back and sideways as though something in her mind is convulsing also, turning inward. Here is Charcot's patient Augustine posed for a photograph in her normal state. It's taken to act as a measure for all the others, where she appears convulsed in various hysterical states. However, photography then was a slow process, and states of normality were taken under the duress of waiting. He says, "Stay just as you are. But time is going on. My jaw hurts and my face is beginning to freeze. You wonder what it is he's after." What it is he is after echoes the hysteric's question. Que vuoi? What do you want from me? It is addressed to a certain kind of knowledge represented by the doctor, the voice of authority. Doctors use what they call pelvic massages to induce hysterical paroxysm as a potential treatment. A way, yes, to release the demon. Nitsa Yorom writes that hysterical is a state of mind, so hysteria might be a way of being, inherent and possible in every one of us given the right context. Why then hide her? Admit her long-term at the Salpêtrière, or treat her as possessed, epileptic, dependent. Did you know that Sam Taylor Wood made a work on hysteria in 1997? Like the possession drawing, it has a body but no voice. Someone has stuck a thumb in her throat, but she also appears to be laughing. In Sam Taylor Wood's film Hysteria, a woman laughs till she cries. Sustaining this activity clearly strains the actor, and this shows in her physiognomy. Forehead, Mouth and neck muscles clench, and at times she lifts her hands as if to hold her head in place. Taylor Wood extends the photographic image, making it temporal, so laugh becomes laughing, cry, crying. In doing so, she elicits state from stasis, ecstasis. This is not a progression because it goes nowhere, although one notices a turnaround in the woman's demeanor, an entropic inwardness corresponding with the exhaustion of the actor. This is a breach in the image, a cutting off, as if a giving up of the self. To what? To the director's instruction, the demands of the role. Broken in two, she is beside herself. There is a certain moment in Dr. Charcot's photograph, those indisputable documents, where the mutual benefit of staging hysteria, life for the women, information for researchers, stardom all around, produce a paradoxical situation. For the more the hysteric delighted in reinventing and imagining herself, the more a kind of ill was exacerbated. In The Cry, Augustine is starting an attack on her back, face upward and mouth open in a perfect crescent. Somebody must have blacked in the shape. At first, inmates were complicit mediums for the voracious researching gaze, happy to perform to camera, but then came a turning point. The Cry shows something real. She is wailing madly, crossing her legs, ripping at her straitjacket, cutting herself off. A cry was the last place she could turn. From laughter to crying, from ecstasy to wailing. How? Why? Hysterics have a reputation of reinventing symptoms and talking nonsense. They were seen but not heard. Like Taylor Wood's videos, their track is silent to others. Their ambiguity of position provides the key to a state that is visionary. Possession is not only possession by spirit, it can also mean custody and ownership. The hysteric has something the doctor wants, and this she both desires and rejects. While knowledge cannot articulate the hysteric ushers the articulation of knowledge. Yet this knowledge is a mystery. So intending to talk about hysteria, I found that hysteria made me talk. And I have become a patient again. The synoptic table of great hysterical symptoms is an index of tiny drawn shapes set out in columns like a manuscript of some kind. Looking closer, it becomes apparent that these are women shockingly, ridiculously mimicking, miming. Then, getting desperate or perhaps simply carried away, you are showing off, sticking your feet in the air or behind your head, doing a backward flip. Manic, mad, insensible. The body's articulation here is distorted, speechless. And yet we want to find in imagery a way out, a space for the voices of hysteria. Charcot's inscription of symptoms is a text that speaks in the doctor's voice. Période de clonisme, période les attitudes passionnelles, période de délire. And yet she is miming something. Repli, a folding back, withdrawal, or return, like my talk, which strikes me as being like little waves over and back. Talking about hysteria is my symptom. What do these words want from me? I perform for you in waves like the hysteric attack. I go through the phases, the period of Charcot, but after one spiral, I arrive at the same place. I could go on forever. So what would you say if we gave voice to Sam Taylor Wood's video? Its lack still troubles me. By silencing her, she is made to look mad, but she is not. So here is my proposition. Let us watch Hysteria with a soundtrack to Marina Abramovic and Ulai's and as viewers, return the voice to the woman while expressing our own in a kind of shouted conversation. If this had happened at the Salpêtrière, if Charcot, Freud, and the other male doctors had taken up the position of the one who's only supposed to know, the history of hysteria might have perhaps worked out differently. Nevertheless, we cannot change that. Let us listen and express at the same time, let the sound move us. The encounter, I hope, will make us laugh and cry too. Are you ready?
We are facing each other, both producing a continuous vocal sound. We slowly build up the tension, our faces coming closer together until we are screaming into each other's open mouths.
Thank you.